There's nothing more frustrating than picking up a beautiful plant from the store and you bring it home and the next thing you know, it looks like this. And whether you have one plant or 100 houseplants, this is something that we all struggle with. It's inevitable that at some point something's going to go wrong with our plants. So in this Houseplant Care 101 episode, I'm going to be sharing the top 10 reasons why your houseplant may be dying and how to fix it. So I'm going to be sharing the symptoms to look out for, the causes for those symptoms, and then also the solution and how to fix it. This Houseplant Care 101 series is sponsored by rePotme.com. With rePotme, you can have all of your houseplant supplies delivered right to your door. They are a one-stop shop for all of your houseplant, orchid, or succulent needs. They have custom handmade houseplant soils ranging from tropical houseplants, cactus and succulents, pothos, snake plants, and more. I cannot live without their clear slotted orchid pots. They have amazing houseplant fertilizers and so much more. I've included their link in my description below and you can get 10% off any soil with my code Ashley. Okay, so first up has to be overwatering. I'd say this is the most common mistake that a lot of us make when we're caring for our plants and causes a lot of the issues that we experience. And it's a little bit nuanced as well because it doesn't necessarily mean that you are watering your plant too much. So here are the symptoms to look out for that may give you an indication that your plant has been overwatered. Yellowing leaves, and not necessarily the old leaves either. If they are wilting and the soil has moisture, but for some reason your plant looks like it's thirsty because it has those drooping leaves. Root rot is a clear indication that your plant has been overwatered and needs to be treated. And how to tell if your plant has root rot is to take a look at the roots. Normally they should be white or cream or bright orange and look really healthy. And if you tug on them, they shouldn't break apart easily. Now, if you notice that they're brown, mushy, they smell bad, they kind of pull apart easily, then the plant definitely has root rot. Sometimes the plant has been struggling with overwatering for so long that even the stems will become mushy themselves. I see this more commonly in cacti and succulents where it's not just the roots that are struggling, but the base of the plant itself. So what causes our plant to be overwatered? Because it's not necessarily that we are giving our plant too much water. The first one is not enough drainage. So the pot itself doesn't have a lot of drainage holes. So that's an easy fix. You just want to make sure that your plants have good drainage, which will help promote airflow and allow the water to kind of drain out the bottom of the pot. The second one is not having a soil that's well draining enough. Most of these plants and houseplants that we bring into our homes are in fact tropical plants and they need a very well draining soil. More well draining than you would think. You don't want to use a standard potting mix, so I'm going to share exactly the type of soil that most of these plants enjoy. I'll share a recipe that you can use to make your own soil and then also some of my favorite like customized soil blends that are on the market. This way it doesn't matter if you're pouring too much water into your pot because any excess water is going to easily drain through the soil and drain through the drainage holes. And it just really takes that pressure off of worrying if I've given my plant too much water because it doesn't really matter as long as it has the right kind of soil and the right type of pot. So what are the solutions if you think your plant has been overwatered? First, check the roots. And if the roots look okay, but the soil is just so saturated that if you squeeze it, the water just pours out, repot that plant with a well-draining soil mixture that's appropriate for the type of plant that you have. Just trim off those yellowing and dying leaves and give that plant some time to bounce back. The biggest concern is if your plant has root rot, and that's where if the roots are looking brown and mushy. A lot of times a plant can have the beginning stages of root rot and some of the roots will look brown and mushy, but it will still have white roots. If that's the case, just get a clean pair of shears that have been sanitized so as not to like spread bacteria problems, and just trim off the brown parts of the roots and the white parts of the roots should bounce back. Now, if you notice that the plant has fully mushy roots, you barely see any white roots, your chances of saving that plant are minimal. However, you can propagate the plant. So a lot of times, even though the roots are looking bad, the stem and the nodes are still pretty healthy. So what you can do is just trim that plant off at the node, discard the part that's, you know, dead and dying, the bottom of the stem and the roots, and then use the healthy part of the plant that you've propagated and put it into some soil. I like to use it in water because I find that's really easy to propagate. And once that plant has developed some good roots, at that point you can plant it in soil. I've saved a lot of plants this way that have developed pretty severe root rot. This suggestion sounds like common sense, but it's basically just make sure that your soil is about halfway to fully dry. You can use your finger, you can use a moisture meter, but don't just water your plant once a week on a watering schedule and not check that the soil has dried out first. And I think we can all be guilty of this, especially if you have a lot of plants that taking the time to check the moisture on all of them can be a bit tedious, but it's worth it if it means that you're going to have a less chance of overwatering your plant. So next up is actually the opposite of overwatering, and it's underwatering. And this can happen for a number of reasons. It could be that you're afraid of overwatering your plant, so you wait too long to water your plants, which can cause like the roots to really shrivel up, and then you give your plant a lot of water and the roots can't handle it because they're shriveled up, and then all of a sudden you've caused overwatering. It could be just because it's challenging to stay on top of watering all the time as often as your plants need it, because we are in the growing months. I know that's something I'm struggling with. Pretty sure this one has been just dealing with being underwatered. It could be that you're watering your plant regularly, but your soil is incorrect for your plant. Some of the symptoms to look out for: wilting leaves, you know, when the plants get really droopy, when the leaves get very, very crispy. Also, if the dry soil is like pulling away from the sides of the pot. The causes of this are simple: infrequent watering, or you have the incorrect soil for your plant. So the first solution is pretty simple, just staying on top of watering, whether that's an app or a timer or something like that. Now, if your plant has become hydrophobic and the soil isn't retaining moisture anymore, so it's just causing that plant to dry out so fast, it's just repotting that plant, using an appropriate soil, using an appropriate pot size, which I'll talk a little bit more about that. And another thing you could do is actually aerate the soil, whether you use a chopstick to kind of poke holes in it, you know, squeeze the plant out. And when you are watering your plant, you could try bottom watering it. So you could place that plant into a bowl of water, and it'll actually soak up the water from the bottom of the plant, which will help the roots. Now, if your plant is severely underwatered, make sure that you're not dousing that plant with water and then the plant is just like sitting in water for a really, really long time, because those roots that have become shriveled up may have a hard time absorbing all of that moisture, which can then cause that plant to become overwatered. Next up is incorrect light, whether that's too much light or too little light. Some of the symptoms are leggy growth. That would be for plants that aren't receiving enough light. And you could also have pale or faded looking leaves, or even sunburnt leaves. That's if they're receiving too much light. And worst case scenario, they start dropping leaves. You're not seeing any new growth. Now, all plants need light to survive, even the plants that are sold as low light plants. If you put them in an area where they're not receiving enough light, it's just like a slow decline for that plant. So the first thing I'd say, let's talk about low light areas and plants that are struggling from low light. And you can tell that they're leggy, they're not putting out any new growth, they're just looking really sad. The new growth is a lot smaller than the old leaves. So the new leaves are a lot smaller. All indications of low light issues. So first up you can do is move the plant to an area where it receives higher light. I'm a big fan of supplemental lighting, and there are so many great grow lights now on the market that just look like light bulbs and they're not going to blast out your eyes. Another easy solution is wiping the leaves off of your plant, and it's not just for aesthetics or so it doesn't look dusty, but it actually helps the plant get some light because they're solar panels basically, and if they're covered in even a light layer of dust, it's going to make it very difficult for that plant to absorb any kind of light that it needs for photosynthesis. And if you're not sure if it's a lighting issue or if it's something else, you can always test the area with a light meter or with your phone. There's different light meter apps that you can use on your phone, and it will tell you if it's a light issue or not. Ooh, the next one is a pest infestation, and boy oh boy do I have a lot of experience in this one. It seems like this is just something that every plant parent ends up having to deal with at some point, and thank goodness we have some amazing options to help with pest management nowadays. All right, here are some of the symptoms to look out for that will indicate pest issues. First up, if the new leaves that come out are torn or look damaged or are shriveled and just really disfigured, it's probably a pest issue. If you see webbing, like cobwebbing around the leaves, if you shine a flashlight kind of in this area and you see webbing like in between the leaves, indication of pests. If you see white stuff on the leaves, there you have it. Those are probably mealybugs. If you see little dark insects crawling all over it, that's a sign of thrips. And if you see little things that kind of look like scales on the plant, that's a sign of scale. All right, so what causes pest infestation on our plants? So the first one is bringing new plants into the home without properly treating it when you bring it home and quarantining it. Most plants will be introduced to some sort of pest at some time or other, and if the plant is not healthy, it's going to have a hard time fighting the pest off, versus if the plant is super, super healthy, it has a lot better chance of survival. If your plants are touching each other and they're overcrowded, that can cause spreading of pests. So let's talk about solutions. First up, you want to identify what kind of pest you have so that you know how to adequately treat it. And then some of my favorite products are mosquito bits for fungus gnats, and you can either put the mosquito bits in the soil or you can make like a tea out of it. Just use hot water, not boiling, let it sit for a few hours, a few tablespoons for a gallon of water, and let it sit out, and then use that water kind of as a tea and water your plants with that. Use that for every few waterings until you notice all the fungus gnats are gone. I have found that systemic granules are a lifesaver when it comes to thrips. Thrips are really, really hard to get rid of. And the systemic granules release an active ingredient, and the plant will actually absorb that active ingredient. And when the pests feed on that plant, it will kill off the pests, and your plant just can thrive and be healthy, even if it has thrips on it. Then another really helpful one is insecticidal soap. So this is really great for spider mites. And honestly, just like spraying your plants off once a month in the shower or outside with the hose will help prevent pests. Now there's a lot of natural remedies as well that you can use. I know a lot of people use cinnamon, diatomaceous earth, they'll use like Dawn dish soap. Beneficial insects are also a really helpful solution. I have released thousands of ladybugs in this room at different points. Once you don't have the beneficial insects anymore, the pests come back in like full force, and then it's really hard to manage it. So you're constantly having to have beneficial insects, whether you use ladybugs or green lacewing flies, or you know, there's like beneficial nematodes and stuff that you can use. So I just ended up using systemic granules because that's what works best for me, but to each their own. It's part of the journey, is experimenting and seeing what works best for you. Next up is nutrient deficiency. These plants are limited to the nutrients in their pots. So if they don't have any food or nutrients in their pot, then they're just gonna have a really, really hard time thriving. So if you're seeing some of the symptoms, which are yellowing leaves, stunted growth, if it's a houseplant that's supposed to flower and it's not flowering at all, then it probably is experiencing a nutrient deficiency. Some causes are lack of fertilization and poor soil quality. So the solutions to this one are great. Fertilize during the growing months. I always like to use a water-soluble fertilizer, and I recommend getting one that says for houseplants if you're using it for your tropical plants. You can use organic, you can use synthetic, whatever your preference is. And my only real advice with this is to make sure that you start at half strength, because you don't want to over fertilize your plant. And then if your plant responds really well, then go to full strength. And you only want to fertilize mainly during the growing months, so spring through the beginning of fall typically. And the other solution is to repot your plant with a really good soil mixture that will retain more nutrients for your plant. This next one isn't talked about that much, and it's temperature extremes. Some of the symptoms are scorched foliage, dropping foliage, wilting leaves. Some of the causes are drafts, cold windows, heat sources. I mean, even something like picking your plant up from the greenhouse and walking it to your car, if it's freezing cold outside, can cause a lot of damage if it's a tropical plant. So the solutions are, if it's really cold outside, pull your plant away from the cold window where it may have loved it during the summer. Maybe that's not the best location for it during the winter months. I mean, it's just simple, being conscious of like where the drafts are, where the heat sources are. And if you run into an issue where that plant is going to be exposed to the cold, just by simply covering it can help make all the difference. For me, the general rule of thumb is if you're comfortable in an area, your plant should be comfortable in that area and at that temperature as well. Next up is a big one that we all deal with, and this is humidity issues. Depending on what zone you live in, you know, like I said, a lot of these plants are tropical plants and they need higher humidity levels. So the obvious symptoms are the leaves are curling, they're crisping up, they're browning on the outside of the leaves. Some more lesser known symptoms would be like if you have a beautiful philodendron and it's the type of philodendron that should grow really huge leaves, but the leaves are staying really small. It could be that the plant needs more humidity to grow those big, beautiful leaves. So obviously the cause of these issues is lower humidity. So most of these tropical plants, like their optimum humidity would be 65% humidity or above. Some easy ways to increase the humidity in your home would be number one, a humidifier. And there are some fantastic humidifiers out there that are amazing. Another thing you can do is a pebble tray. So it's a tray with pebbles and you put some water and you can put your plant on that, and as the water evaporates, it will provide humidity to your plant. Some people really like to mist their plants. I tend to not mist my plants because it can cause like bacteria on the leaves to develop. Now, if you have really good airflow, the chances of that are minimal. Maybe use like a distilled water or something to help prevent bacteria and mineral buildup. Number 8 is improper pot size. Some of the symptoms if your pot is too small would be it's not putting out any new growth, and it's very root bound, so the roots are so compact and it's not retaining any moisture. Sometimes we find a great pot and it's honestly way too big for the size of the root ball of the plant, so you're going to have a lot more soil to roots ratio, and this can cause a lot of problems. First of all, the roots aren't going to be able to absorb all of the moisture in the soil because there's so much more soil than roots. So it's going to be way more at risk for being overwatered and developing root rot. Also, the plant is going to primarily focus on root growth to fill up that pot, so you're not going to see new growth on your plant for a really, really long time. So the solution if your pot is too small and it's very root bound is to go 1 to 2 inches bigger. And if your plant's in a pot that's just way too big, you just want to get a smaller pot size, and you want to determine the pot size by the size of the roots of the plant. So pull that plant out, get rid of all the excess soil, actually take a look at that root ball, see how big it actually is, and then go like 1 inch to 2 inches bigger than the actual root ball. Another thing that you can do if you don't want your plant to grow a bunch, if you really like the pot that it's in, you can trim the roots down, and that will kind of keep the plant somewhat smaller. The plant is going to focus a lot on root repair, and it's not going to put out a lot more new growth. And you can use the same size pot. So number 9 is improper potting mix. Some of the symptoms are poor growth, water retention issues, as in it's retaining too much water, which is usually the issue, or it's not retaining enough water. It could also be that the plant is wilting and it's showing some of the symptoms from some of the other issues that we addressed, all because it has the wrong type of soil. And because you only need to repot your plants a lot of times, maybe every 1 to 2 years. So it's just worth it, in my opinion, to either make your own custom soil or to go ahead and purchase a customized soil that's made specifically for the type of plant that you have. So a very simple recipe for most tropical plants would be a 50% potting mix for moisture retention, and then a 50% some other substrate, whether that's perlite or pumice or orchid bark. The other option is to buy a soil that's already customized for the type of plant that you have. And there are a lot of amazing customized soils out there. I am partial to the rePotme soils. They are incredible. This one is Houseplant and Tropical Classic Potting Mix, and it works really well for most tropical plants. They also have one specifically for philodendron, specifically for monstera, specifically for cacti and succulents. And I could go on and on and on all of their amazing soils. It's definitely worth taking a look, especially since you only repot every 1 to 2 years. It's worth making sure you have the right type of soil, and theirs is like the gold status for potting soils and potting mixtures. So number 10 is that your plant is extremely root bound. Some of the symptoms would be really stunted growth, you know, roots coming out the top of the pot, coming out the bottom of the pot, the soil isn't retaining any moisture. And the solutions for this, we've already covered most of that, which is just to repot your plant. You want to make sure that the pot you use has really good drainage. I always like to use the clear slotted orchid pots from rePotme. They're my absolute favorite. They have tons of drainage. I can keep an eye on the moisture. I can keep an eye on how the roots are doing. I can keep an eye on the soil. And just go 1 to 2 sizes bigger, like I said, and make sure you use a really, really good soil, and you should be good to go. So there you have it. Those are the top 10 reasons why your plant may be dying and how to save them. And feel free to add any tips that you have. We have a really knowledgeable plant community, and I have a lot more episodes in my Houseplant Care 101 series. Feel free to ask any questions. I'll try to answer them as best as I can. And all of the products that I mentioned today from rePotme that I'm obsessed with, I have included in my description below, links to everything. And definitely subscribe if you like plant stuff and you want to see future episodes in your newsfeed. And we also have a wonderful community on TikTok and Instagram. All right, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and that I get to see you soon. Bye.